The woman came as promised, and was praised by the dark figure behind her, but the locals soon found her disfigured body in the well. They turned to the head of the settlement, but the latter said that there was not much time left to wait. A paladin would soon arrive, who would definitely be able to settle the problem with the demon. Rumors of the imminent visit of the strongest creature with divine power quickly spread through the crowd, when suddenly a rider in a cheap leather chain mail appeared behind the villagers. The old man assumed it was one of the demon hunters, but the stranger introduced himself as 𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛, a disciple of the Holy Order who had been tasked with destroying the demon. No one understood why they sent not a real paladin, but only a newcomer, because dozens of first-class hunters had already failed. So no one believed that this young man could cope, and even the head himself accepted the fact that their village was over. Inspecting the funeral pyre, 𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛 concluded that this demon had done a lot of damage, and the old man confirmed that as many as 10 girls had already been found, mangled in various places. Noticing the man's concern, 𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛 warned that he wasn't like the usual newcomers, promising to start fighting the foulness right away. The first order of business was to gather all the girls who might be targeted in one place. Then he used golden light, a unique skill of paladins, and soon found the demon in one of the girls, ordering the latter to be held tightly. Her little brother begged the villagers not to burn his little sister, but they ordered him to stand aside, because there was nothing to be done. If she was really possessed by a demon, only flames could help. Nevertheless, 𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛 leaned the boy against him, declaring that he did not burn people. Instead, it was necessary to determine the exact place where the demon was hiding, when suddenly he himself awakened, promising to punish anyone who dared to disturb Sebastian. The paladin bared his sword and, imbuing the blade with golden light, raised it above the head of the unfortunate victim, causing her to regain consciousness. 𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛 asked her not to worry, as his weapon was directed only against the forces of evil, and asked what place the demon had pointed to. Soon 𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛 reached the desired brewery. However, after looking around he realized that he had been lured here for nothing. In that case, he decided to play along with Sebastian and loudly motioned for the horse to get to the other side. Waiting for the rider to leave, the demon came out of hiding, wondering why the bastards were coming here, when 𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛 called out to him from above and, noticing Sebastian's fleeing, threw his sword at him, pinning him to the ground. The paladin warned that he was always persistent in his hunt for evil, but the demon offered to discuss how many of those cocky losers had already lost their heads at his hands. Sebastian promised that 𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛's death would be particularly painful and rushed forward, but he was struck again with his sword, and then felt the golden light and was in the paladin's hands. The young man offered to place bets on which of the two of them would live longer. The demon offered to discuss it calmly, but 𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛 did not want to listen to someone who was tearing off the limbs of unfortunate girls unnecessarily. Just before he left, the paladin warned the head that the demon's banishment was only a temporary measure, and handed the boy a vial of holy water, telling him to give it to his sister when she woke up. Even in total darkness, the noble light would surely shine through. A platinum knight who destroys evil and brings judgment on behalf of the higher powers. Those who light up the night are what paladins are called in this world. 𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛 threw the exhausted demon to the ground, explaining that he had not given the village holy water but a simple sleeping pill, but he was sure that the girl would recover if he destroyed Sebastian before she woke up. 𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛's disciple's real name is Day. It's been 2 years since he became a paladin in the game, but he still doesn't believe in the intervention of the higher powers that all those naive locals pray to so persistently. Sebastian couldn't believe his ears. How could a paladin who didn't believe in a higher power use golden light? This remark made 𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛 very angry, so he smashed his fist into the face of the defeated monster, and the game informed him that he would receive a character upgrade after every time he killed such creatures. Day was actually very tired of this silly story. A world ruled by the highest deities, but the quiet days had been disturbed by demons. The one who stood alone against them, the sun god 𝑃𝑎𝑙𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛, after his victory, people decided to dedicate their lives to serving his will, and some of the worshippers were even given special powers to fight the monsters. That's how 𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛 became stronger, and that's exactly what the game's storyline sounds like. Finding himself in this strange world, the young man noticed that all the events are suspiciously reminiscent of a fantasy game that was recently released. This game is known for its nightmarish difficulty, and the number of players reaching the end credits is 0. After recovering from the hard hit, 𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛 noticed 2 other people beside him, desperately praying to their god. He didn't understand why they weren't running, despite the countless monsters around them. Day realized that if he stood like a pillar, he would surely die here, so he raised the sword of one of the slain defenders. Suddenly, the area in front of him lit up with a bright light, and a status window appeared above his head, announcing that he had gained a unique skill that he had never seen before in this game. Suddenly, the newly minted paladin felt an unprecedented surge of strength and confidence, and then rushed forward, cutting through the demon hovering overhead. However, the fight was not over yet. At the same second, a huge minotaur appeared in front of Day and threw the young man far back with its horns. To his surprise, this time he felt absolutely no pain, which made him conclude that the golden divine light was the weakness of the monsters here. He rose to his feet, seeing the message in front of him that he now hated demons and would receive a character increase for each demon he killed. Gathering his strength, Aiden rushed forward again and struck the minotaur down with a powerful blow, then pierced the monster's head with his blade. Of course, no one was able to complete this game due to the nightmarish difficulty level, but there was one player who got closer to the ending than the rest, Ug Day. The villagers welcomed the paladin who had killed the hated demon, and the village headman even handed over a bag of gold as a token of gratitude, but Aiden objected that the servant of Baxgar did not take money for his help. The warrior announced that he wanted to check something last, and inquired how long ago the creature he had killed had settled here, and in response learned that about a week ago. On the way back, Day reflected on all this pretense. He doesn't believe in deities, but this hypocrisy is necessary for characterization growth. It's been about 2 years since he got into the game. The difficulty is crazy, of course, but the situation is simplified by the paladin's skills. Still, the only way to progress further is to follow the story. Suddenly, another rider dressed in white jumped out of the bushes onto the road, a face in which Aiden recognized his teacher Zirith. The man praised the demon for a job well done and told him that it was time for the final test, which would allow him to become a full-fledged paladin in his own right. Soon the two travelers reached the Baron's castle. The entrance gate was hung with the bloody corpses of men, and Zirith explained that this was the price the guards had paid for failing to preserve the innocence of the Baron's own daughter. Day realized once again how disgusting this world was. A fly's life was worth more than a man's, but the worst part was that he was used to it. Finally, the doors to the main hall opened, but there was a shout of displeasure from a young girl who didn't like that the paladin had kept her waiting so long. Aiden threw a wounded demon at her feet as proof that he was not loitering, but Eleanor was furious at the sight of the living incubus and ordered the head of the impudent man who had brought it. Sebastian was puzzled and asked who the girl was, but she struck the incubus in the face with a sharp heel. Aiden explained that he was simply following the Baron's orders to take out his anger on this creature, though he could not understand if the demon was really seeing Eleanor for the first time. Suddenly she slapped the young man, shouting that the latter had better bow his head and beg for forgiveness. She tried to strike a second blow, but Day grabbed her arm, telling her to think about whether she really wanted to make an enemy of a paladin with the power of golden light. In that case, Eleanor called one of the maids and slapped her several times in the face. Aiden resented such a thing, but the girl objected that she would decide what to do with her things. In any case, she ordered to get rid of the demon, but the paladin informed her that he couldn't so easily kill someone who had dishonored the daughter of the Baron himself. He plowed Sebastian to the ground and declared that the only reason he would die so painfully was because of the insolence with which he had spread his filthy hands. The demon came to bewilderment again, shouting that he had not touched the girl. The knight asked Eleanor to go to his room, as there was nothing to see, but Sebastian turned to him, ordering him not to pretend that they did not know each other, and asked why he had sacrificed an entire village to summon the demon. Now everything was clear to the young man, and he hurried to cut off the head of the hated monster, but he asked the young baroness to stay, saying that he had made the 49th killing of the unclean and became a full-fledged paladin, and therefore he simply could not ignore Sebastian's dying words. Eleanor shouted that first there must be solid evidence to investigate, and Aiden recalled the corpses hanging at the gate. They were all guards who had paid for a mistake, but the knight of the escort was still alive. From this, the paladin concluded that this man cared about the girl. By the way, the incubus killed a minute earlier absorbed the attraction of its victims. All of them went through a terrible agony, and their bodies were found in a disfigured state, but on the Baroness there is not a scratch. In addition, according to the villagers, the demon appeared out of nowhere, as if it had been summoned somewhere nearby. Aiden admitted that he could smell an odor he wouldn't confuse with anything. This escort knight was soaked in demonic stench, and so the paladin pounced on him, applying golden light. He wasn't wrong. About a week ago, the man had had to kill a maid who might have blabbed about his affair with the Baroness, but the cry had still been heard. Eleanor asked her lover to prove his loyalty and summon a demon to blame, for the servants of the sun god would deal with him anyway. The magic of the summoning revealed itself as soon as the young man used his ability, and then Zirith came to the scene of the investigation, announcing that he had found vials of fake holy water in the knight's apartments. Of course, if it had been real, it would have cleared the traces of the summoning. Aiden had suspected the Baroness from the beginning, so he asked the teacher to search the apartments of the suspects while he distracted them with conversation. Inquisitor Xerath is one of the most infamous characters in the game, you could say a fanatic of the sun god cult. Such a man simply couldn't help but find evidence. Forging holy water to cover up a crime, the punishment for such a misdemeanor is one thing, death. Aiden informed the girl that it was not his job to find the truth, only to bring those who deserved it to justice. He also warned that, despite Eleanor's lack of direct connection with demons, she was also guilty, and the Paladin's words were both truth and proof. Eleanor shrieked that she knew nothing about the demon, and claimed that the knight had done everything himself and ordered her to keep silent on pain of death. Overcoming the incredible pain, the man tried to touch his mistress, offering her to accept death together, but she squeamishly waved him away. As the criminal's body turned to ash, the Baron himself appeared in the room, concerned about what was happening. Xerath was glad to see him, admitting that the Paladins themselves were surprised by the situation. This time he decided not to tell Mr. Meyer all the truth so as not to ruin the friendship, and Aiden warned that this time the girl was lucky, but the next purification would affect everyone without exception. Eleanor indicated that she needed to rest, and the Paladin escorted her out with a hard stare. Even though the girl had escaped justice now, many had seen and heard everything that had happened here, and soon rumors would spread like wildfire, even the Baron would know about them. In the end, the loss of her reputation will be Eleanor Meyer's recompense. The Bishop of the Southwestern Diocese, Mr. Farrell, also came to greet the famous Paladin, though Aiden himself had no idea how the man came to be here. When talking about the game's difficulty and bad characters, the first thing that comes to mind is Farrell. However, Day was perplexed as to what happened to the difficulty, as this villain was only supposed to appear in the middle of the story. The bishop apologized for not even letting him rest, but explained that he had come here to ask the Paladin for something. Normally, cult popes ordain warriors in person, but now Farrell had expressed a desire for a short ceremony since a group of demon followers had recently been discovered. Xerath assumed it was about another cult, and the bishop confirmed that the members were too strong this time. They couldn't be handled by ordinary soldiers, so overwhelming power was needed. Day recalled that due to the internal problems of the sun god cult, Paladin support had not been available at the time. Nothing good could be expected from Farrell, but he had announced that Aiden was now an officially ordained Paladin, so he had asked them to hunt down the wicked who dared to go against the sun god. The bishop had also mentioned children, whose disappearance must be prevented, but Day was well aware of the bastard's predilections. Whichever way you choose to play the game, you're still going to run into Farrell. The young men knew that the nasty old man just wanted to poach the unfortunate children from the demonic followers, and so Day decided to play along. Farrell was in a noticeable hurry to be initiated, and the Paladin promised himself to take this opportunity to put an end to this villain once and for all. With a solemn speech, Farrell announced that Aiden could now administer justice in the name of the sun god, and no one would dare stand in his way. The Paladin looked at his new armor and thought it was too much. It looked cool in the game but too bulky in real life, but his temporary servant, Juven, argued that the armor only emphasized the greatness of the church's main symbol. The boy had heard about all of Aiden's exploits, and so he admitted that he was incredibly happy to serve him, albeit for a short time. In fact, this recruit was sent by Farrell. Despite the fact that such children are the elite of the church, Juven is rather scruffy and physically weak. The Paladin also noticed the weak troops allocated by the nasty old man. Instead of the strongest mages and warriors, ordinary knights, which isn't surprising considering Farrell wants to intercept the children, not free them. Aiden was certain that the bishop had deliberately chosen a place where the cult was strongest to set a trap for those sent, though he didn't understand why others would get involved. Noticing the tense face of his former apprentice, Xerath assumed that the new armor didn't exactly inspire him, but the young man only wondered if the Inquisitor had been away, as it gave off a not-so-pleasant scent. Given the increase in characteristics, Aiden could now see and hear things that ordinary people could not. Xerath admitted to giving in to his curiosity and visiting the destination beforehand. There was definitely magic in the air, but the Inquisitor did not attack so that the attack would continue to be a surprise to the cultists. To remain undetected, Xerath had to hide in a nearby cemetery, but some graves were unearthed. Day immediately realized that they were traces of necromancy. It seemed that cultists used magic to summon the dead. Aiden assumed it was a trap, so he offered the master two options: to report it to the bishop or to act, though for the Paladin the choice was obvious. He wanted to see it with his own eyes. When they arrived, one of the knights asked what they should do now, and given their futility, Aiden announced that they had better stay here. Suddenly, disfigured half-decomposed bodies began to emerge from the ground, and so all the warriors were ordered to prepare for battle. For a moment, the paladin managed to notice the activation of a skill, so it seems that the necromancer is somewhere nearby, and this is a great opportunity to earn more experience points. Aiden swung his sword, frying some of the dead. Inspired by what he had seen, Zirith assumed that he would be able to use the spell more easily and, creating a ball of golden light in his hand, threw it at the rest of the undead, causing their bodies to burst apart. Just as Day had thought, the former teacher had once again exceeded expectations. If he was an enemy instead of an ally, he would surely be the most difficult opponent in the game. In any case, he offered to find the necromancer, but the latter turned to the warriors himself, offering to see what kind of dough they were really made of. Suddenly, a new batch of dead appeared from the ground. Zirith asked his apprentice to be careful, as he could not resurrect, but he remarked that it would be better to think about his own firepower. Aiden realized that the necromancer had to be neutralized first, but was not at all sure what to do with the recruits. He asked the young warriors to stay behind, but Zirith insisted on giving them a chance, for no one was born a veteran, except maybe a monster like Aiden himself. In that case, the paladin turned to the disciples of the sun god, warning them that he would not be able to protect them once the battle began. But they explained that they would fight even if they had to risk their own lives. Aiden had no right to reject such determination, and so he announced that the heretics to be fought were standing right in front of the recruits. Since their bodies were still weak, the paladin ordered them to be careful and keep to either side of him. Lastly, Aiden announced the imminent judgment of all the opponents of the sun god and rushed forward himself. In any case, the recruits should be strengthened by divine power. They can't summon it themselves, but next to the paladin they should be able to cope. The first strike was smoother than expected. Zirith was also at his best as always, throwing a fireball at the dead, and the recruits seemed to be doing well. Aiden noticed that the further he got through the undead, the worse the magic got. The necromancer seemed to be standing right behind his dead warriors. If they catch him, it's all over. The corpses will break free of their shackles and go back into the ground, despite Farrell's plans. Suddenly Aiden noticed a huge enemy ahead, and in the next second the blood of his comrades rushed into his face. The paladin immediately attacked the Dark Knight, but he was informed that the dead were approaching. After making sure everyone was having fun, the necromancer turned to Aiden, informing him that his strongest warrior considered the young man a worthy opponent and had been eager to fight from the start. He admitted that he would have liked to see the show, but would have to leave because of the pile of things to do. Day remembered that usually necromancers capable of summoning a Dark Knight are quite famous, but this was the first time he'd seen one. Recruits will have a hard time dealing with the undead horde that is constantly regenerating. However, the paladin can't ignore the Dark Knight to help the younglings. He didn't understand why such a strong opponent appeared at this stage of the game, though he then assumed it was all about the difficulty. Zirith asked his former ward if he could handle the knight, and he confirmed that he could, but asked him to watch his back, taking care of the dead. The Inquisitor warned that he would go to capture the necromancer but asked Aiden to try to get hold of the Dark Knight's core. Despite the fact that everything will end once Zirith catches the sorcerer, the paladin decided to fight the enemy in such a way that he will still get the core, because with it he will regenerate infinitely, but it is also his weakness. Finally, the paladin managed to pierce the monster in the shoulder, but the monster only drew his blade and continued the battle. Aiden paused for a second to consider where to strike next, and then tried to strike the knight's head, but he managed to defend himself and deflect the blow. Finally, he picked the right moment and severed the head, assuming this would end the battle, as he was suddenly thrown back with force. Had it not been for the armor, all his organs would have been severed. It seemed that the head was not the Dark Knight's weak point after all. In that case, the paladin wondered why he had to defend himself, but in the next moment he realized that the monster was deflecting blows that could cut his body in half. After checking a few more guesses, the young man realized that the core was in his groin, but he still could not strike directly, and therefore decided to cut off his leg first in order to unbalance his opponent. Soon the Dark Knight was lying on the ground, and Aiden was able to pierce exactly where the core was. Talking to the necromancer about the deities, Zirith, to his surprise, found the paladin and the surviving army near him, and therefore assumed that the undead were finished. In any case, Aiden said that he had a lot of questions for the necromancer, but the latter jumped off the cliff at the same second, shouting that he would not answer. The paladin threw his sword at him to finish off the necromancer, and Zirith suggested that he go back to the bishop, saying that he would catch up with his comrades as soon as he got his sword, and jumped down as well. Sheathing his second blade, Aiden clung to the rock with it, hanging right next to the necromancer, who remarked that the paladin would make an excellent Dark Knight. and he would gladly trade a deal with the bishop to get himself a guy with such unique skills. As expected, Farrell is in on the plot as well. With that in mind, the sacrifice scene should change as well, and Day decided to check it out soon, bringing the necromancer with him as well. Returning back, the young man was horrified to find the nearest village completely destroyed, and Xerath standing by a pillar with children tied to it, begging the paladin for salvation. Noticing his former apprentice, the Inquisitor informed him that he was a little late and snapped his fingers, activating the flames of purification. Day had been planning everything for so long that he had forgotten about this touch fanatic who burns children associated with the demon cult without question. Day was never a good person, and all the good deeds after getting into the game were only needed for characterization growth. It's a basic thing to survive in the local world, as it's ruled by the strong. Rushing to save the poor children, the young man did not realize whether it was a good deed. Suddenly he woke up in a carriage, and across from him sat the one who was called the saint of the church, Uriel. The girl explained that they were now leaving for a ceremony, but suddenly Aiden jumped up from his seat, screaming about Xerath and the captured children. The saint asked not to move so abruptly, and in general she noticed that the paladin was too rude to the one thanks to whom he stayed alive. In any case, the girl said that the children had been cleansed and were safe. Aiden himself had escaped the flames only because Uriel had been nearby and the others had gone to the church headquarters. The young man asked if that was true, and the saint confirmed that it was probably the only time in her memory that Master Xerath had changed his mind. This surprised Day, as the game had never seen such sudden plot twists. However, he didn't expect to hear anything more useful from her, so he decided to look into the situation. Noticing the flag attached to the carriage, Aiden assumed that Uriel had not yet become a saint, which meant that this cortege was on its way to an initiation ceremony. If he remembered correctly, it was the root of one event just related to this girl. Under normal circumstances, Day would have done nothing, but this time he warned his companion that a group of men posing as church officials would soon appear on the road, and ordered Uriel to stay away from them at all costs. Now that Aiden had repaid the girl for her rescue, he jumped out of the carriage and ran into the thickest part of the forest. If Uriel dies, the second part of the game will become much more difficult. This is the reason why the young man warned her. Now he decided to go to the church headquarters, and Yuvan appeared on horseback, promising to escort the paladin wherever he went. The very fact that this recruit was still alive pleased Day, and then he jumped on his horse and rode off to wherever he was going. Yuan admitted that he had already thought of the paladin's death when he saw him engulfed in blue flames. He was surprised to hear that, because Xerath's ability could not be cancelled once it was activated. Hearing from the recruit that the flames had simply disappeared, Jite was even more perplexed, as there was nothing of the sort in the story. Speaking of which, Yuan held out a letter to the paladin, explaining that Xerath himself, who was currently sitting in his residence, reflecting on the past, had asked for it. Finally, Aiden arrived, and the master of the manor ordered to follow him, as the matter was urgent. The master reminded him that he was not a fan of large social events. In fact, he was not comfortable even being in the kingdom. He told of how he had once heard of the roots of evil lying in the church. Despite the fact that they are supposed to remain the purest of all, they still took on sin. Xerath confessed that the more he stayed in that residence, the more he felt as if his faith was being rejected. Aiden reported that he wasn't quite sure why he was being told that, and Xerath explained that he was simply mired in contradictions, vacillating between faith and practicality. These contradictions are growing more and more, and he just can't choose. When he reached the right room, Xerath explained that Bishop Farrell had become obsessed with his lust, and had made a pact with the heretics regarding the kidnapped children. Aiden recalled that in exchange, the necromancer was to get himself a new dark knight. In any case, that story was now over, and Xerath announced that they were both facing a choice. An unexpected name came out of Farrell's mouth, Archbishop Tegain, the head of the moderate faction who was cautious about returning the Holy Lands. In that case, Aiden assumed that the proponents of a violent return would gain a huge advantage by charging the Archbishop, and that would entail war. Xerath admitted that he didn't know what to do at all, and so he offered to make the choice to his apprentice. Aiden remarked that, despite the evidence, there was no proof, so it would be better to check it out before reporting, since it could lead to a reckless war. In that case, Xerath offered to report and investigate at once, but Day knew that the Holy Lands were infested with demons, and therefore all his companions would be killed without proper preparation, so Aiden vowed to stop Xerath, even if he had to use force to do so. The master was once again convinced of his apprentice's straightforwardness, and was about to activate the flames of purification again, but at the last moment he kept himself from snapping his fingers, telling him how the previous time the sun god had prevented him from burning innocent people. Zirith promised that he would never make the same mistake again, and so he allowed the young paladin to point those criminals towards the god, though he asked to forgive the pathetic teacher for shifting all responsibility to his ward. Suddenly Aiden's hand glowed with a bright flame, and Zirith realized that the god had chosen him. The former bishop begged for an end to his torment, but the blue flame was known to be impossible to undo once activated. Finally, when Farrell along with the necromancer turned into a handful of ashes, Aiden lost his balance for a second, and the teacher warned that the blue flame of purification consumed a huge amount of stamina and holy power. Of course, Day was glad that he had become stronger, but he still didn't understand the reason why. Previously, he had been building up characteristics according to his own intentions and plans, so getting such an ability was quite a big surprise. Still, Aiden inquired about his teacher's condition, as flames were his signature move in the game, so he assumed that Zirith might be a little upset, but he explained that only the worthy could receive such a gift, so he only asked to use the flames for good. Now Aiden suggested that the teacher talk to the archbishop, for he assumed that Farrell would not talk nonsense about Tihane's ties with demons without reason, but the inquisitor objected that today he needed to attend the dedication ceremony of the saint, and the paladin himself expressed a desire to rest a little. A few days later, Farrell's apostasy and atrocities became the topic of discussion for the sacred assembly. Some argued that it was necessary to cover up what had happened, but the procession of the Sassalier family stumbled upon everything that Zirith had done in the course of the investigation, so that it became simply impossible to turn a blind eye to the incident. Dozens of children were found in the basement of the former bishop's residence. Some were already dead, while the bodies of the rest bore the marks of brutal violence. In order to protect the victims, they were handed over to a monastery. A specially formed group began searching for heretics, but all that could be found were a couple of priests caught in corruption. Watching the unfortunate children, Zirith asked his apprentice if he had gotten the urge to kill. It wasn't enough that he was doing atrocities to the little ones, he was killing their parents right in front of them. Aiden admitted that the flames didn't seem to obey his will, but Zirith explained that it would happen as soon as the sun god believed in the paladin's beliefs. For example, the Inquisitor's own key was judgment in the name of salvation, but the young man might have something else in mind. In any case, there was no way to affect the flames, so they would have to learn by practice. Suddenly Aiden noticed a recruit practicing hard with a sword, and Zirith told him that Yuan practiced here every day because he was upset about not being useful in the battle with the dead. After the incident was completely over, Aiden became the central figure of what had happened. At the sainthood ceremony, a whole crowd of nobles gathered around him, who had heard not only about his saving the children and defeating the Dark Knight, but also about the fact that the young man had survived the blue flame. Nevertheless, to the other paladins, he became a laughingstock, though it was more to do with envy. Finally, one of them came over to say hello and praised the young man for how quickly he had passed all the tests, but remarked that defeating the Dark Knight would never compare to defeating the huge bird of prey Mantu. Aiden appreciated this cheap provocation and squeezed his opponent's arm with such force that he fell to the ground. The braggart didn't understand what was the matter. This guy's strength was clearly beyond that of a simple paladin. Suddenly, behind the backs of the men, the culprit of the celebration, Uriel, also appeared. The girl confessed that Sir Aiden's advice had saved her life, and so she officially decided to thank him, announcing that her father had promised a high reward. However, the paladin refused to accept the reward, declaring that Uriel had been saved by a god, albeit by his hands, and therefore all thanks should be directed to 𝑃𝑎𝑙𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛. In that case, the girl indicated that she wished to speak to the young man alone. When they met outside the temple, Uriel wondered if the fact that Aiden had thrown himself into the blue flames to save innocent children was also the will of 𝑃𝑎𝑙𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛. In fact, the young man had assumed the girl would want to ask about the attack on the cartage, but she asked permission to inquire about the reasoning behind the decision to take such a risk. Aiden explained that he had done it for himself, but the answer seemed ambiguous to Uriel. In any case, such dedication deserved to be rewarded. It could be considered the will of 𝑃𝑎𝑙𝑎𝑑𝑖𝑛 as well, and so the girl asked the paladin to give her his hand. Day assumed that the newly minted saint was about to give a blessing. It's a kind of performance-enhancing buff, so there's no way to pass up such good fortune. After the solemn speech, Uriel was asked to swear an oath of allegiance to the teachings of the sun god, and he did so, even though he knew about the girl's unique ability insight, with which he sees any lie. The girl looked at the paladin with bewilderment, realizing that he was deceiving, but did not have time to ask what was the matter, as Yuvan came running to them and informed the Lord about the arrival of Archbishop Tegain. Aiden immediately snapped out of his seat, thanking Uriel for the blessing, but leaving his interlocutor puzzled. First of all, he was running away again, and secondly, as it turned out, he was deceiving, but the saint simply could not understand how such a strong paladin could not believe in the sun god.